In today's lesson, we are going to be working on determining where to place the decimal with decimal division using estimation and number sense. So I have three problems that we're going to take a look at first, and we're going to determine where to place the decimal using estimation. So the first one that I'm going to take a look at is I'm going to take a look at 16 3800ths divided by 5200ths equals 315. So I'm going to go ahead and round, and I'm going to round 16, and I'm going to do 16. And when I do 16, and I'm going to divide it by a half. So when we are dividing by a half in my estimation, it's going to be the same thing as multiplying by a half. It's not going to be 8 because I don't have 8. If I were multiplying by 0.5, it would be the same thing as dividing by 2. But when I divide by a half, it's the same thing. So when I divide by a half, I'm really multiplying by 2. So if that's the case, the answer is going to be near when I do 16 times 2. 16 times 2 is going to be 32. So my decimal is going to go right there. It's going to go between the 1 and the 5. So notice here, it's not like multiplication where, oh, I had 1, 2, 3, 4 values behind the decimal. So I should have 1, 2, 3, 4 values behind the decimal. It really is going to be looking at some number sense to determine where that decimal is going to go. So estimation is going to be a really good strategy for you to use. The next one that I take a look at is I'm going to do 35 and 4900ths divided by 1.2. So if I use estimation and I'm round, so I'm just going to say 35 and divided by 1. Well, 35 divided by 1 is going to be 35. So when I take a look at my answer here, the value that gets me close to 35 is going to be 29 and 575 thousandths, because 29 is close to 35. So that's where that estimation is going to come into play. All right, if we take a look at our last one, I'm going to do 4 tenths divided by 32 hundredths. So if I did 4 tenths, and I'm going to round 32 hundredths, I'm going to use a compatible number of 4 tenths. Well, when I divide a number by itself, I get 1. So my answer is going to be close to 1. So it's going to be 1 and 25 hundredths. So here I used estimation to help me determine where to place the decimals. I can also use some of the number sense that we've talked about to help us divide. So one of the things that we talked about with number sense is we looked at if the dividend was less than the divisor, then my quotient, the quotient is going to be less than 1. So if the dividend is less than the divisor, the quotient is going to be less than 1. If the divisor, if the dividend is greater than the divisor, then the quotient is going to be greater than 1. Okay, so dividend less than the divisor, the quotient is going to be less than 1. Dividend greater than the divisor, the quotient is going to be greater than 1. So that'll help us when we start looking at some of our decimals to determine where the decimal placement is going to go. All right, so let's take a look at our first problem. So the first problem that we have, it says how many quarters are in $15.50. So I'm looking at how many quarters are going to be in $15.50. So I'm going to take 1550 and I'm going to divide it by 25 hundredths. And then it says we get an answer of 620, and we're going to determine where we are placing the decimal. And so we just talked about that if the dividend is greater than the divisor, the quotient is going to be greater than 1. So if the quotient is going to be greater than 1, the decimal is not going to go in front of the 6. So we need to see where it's going to be using some estimation. So if I take 1550 and I look at it this way. So I know that there are going to be 4 quarters. I'm going to use some number sense here. 4 quarters in a dollar. So if there are 4 quarters in a dollar, that means in $15, it's going to be 15 times 4, which is going to be 60. And then my 50 cents is going to be 2 quarters. So it's going to be 2 quarters for a total of 62. So the decimal is going to fit right there. It's going to be 62.0. So this one I use number sense. I use what I know about quarters. So 4 quarters equals $1. So I multiplied 15 times 4. And that told me how many quarters it was. And then I looked at how many quarters was 50 cents. That was 2. So I got an answer of $62. Okay. We take a look at our next one. We have 1 and 2 tenths divided by 2 and 5 tenths. And then we have 4, 8, and 0. So now we're going to go back and look at that. So the divisor is the larger number. So the dividend is less than the divisor. So my quotient needs to be less than 1. So because my quotient needs to be less than 1, the decimal is going to go in front of the 4. So my answer is going to be 0.480. If I look at this using estimation as well, I have 1 divided by 2. Well, 1 divided by 2 is going to be a half, and a half is near 4 and 80 thousandths. Alrighty. So let's move into your guided practice. So if we take a look at number 1, it says if the dividend is 2.63 and the divisor is less than 1, so we have a divisor of less than 1, what can you say about the quotient? So if the dividend is greater than the divisor, the quotient is going to be greater than 2.63. So the quotient will be greater than, so I'm going to put this greater than 2.63. The quotient will be greater than 2.63. So that's how I can show it mathematically. So if I have a divisor less than 1, so the dividend is greater than the divisor, the quotient is going to be greater than 2.63. All right, number 2 says Lena found that 1.44, so 1 and 44 hundredths divided by 1 and 2 tenths is equal to 12 hundredths. Did she put the decimal point in the correct spot? So the first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and we need to evaluate. So 1.44, I'm going to say that that's close to 1.5. And I'm going to divide this by 1. So 1.5 divided by 1 is going to be 1.5. So the place to put the decimal then, if I compare, if we got 1.5, the decimal point needs to go, so the decimal point needs to go between, the 1 and the 2. So this is actually going to be 1.2. Is going to be the answer for 144 divided by 1 and 44 hundredths divided by 1 and 2 tenths. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try. So if we take a look at our first one, we have 7.68 divided by 1.5 equals 512. I'm just going to go ahead and write them out for a second. 256.5 divided by 2.5 equals 102.6. And then 1127 decimal 84 divided by 3.8 equals 2968. And then the last one that we're going to take a look at is 96 divided by 96 equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's it. how many zeros I had on that one. Yep, 5. Okay, so let's go through and let's take a look at this. So first thing I have is I have 7.68 divided by 1.5. So dividend is greater, the dividend is greater than the divisor, so my answer is going to be greater than 1. So it's not going to be 5.12, or it's not going to be 5.512. So if I look at this and I just say, okay, if I do 7 divided by 1 is going to give me the 7, the answer that's near 7 is going to be 5.12. So that's going to be the best place to put the decimal. 256 and a half divided by 2.5. So if I look at this one, if I do 250 divided by 2.5, that means my answer is going to be around 100. So here I'm going to put the decimal at 102.6. Look at our next one. We have 1,127 and 84 hundredths divided by 3.8. So looking at this one, I'm going to say that this is going to be near 1,200. I'll do a math fact of 12,000, 1,200. I'm doing a math fact that of near this value. So I'm going to divide it by 4. And when I divide it by 4, it's going to be 300. So the best place to put my decimal is going to be 296.8. So the decimal goes between the 6 and the 8. Okay, 96 hundredths, or 96 divided by 96 hundredths. So here, really, I'm looking at how many times did I multiply 96 hundredths to get to 96. And so the answer on that one is I multiplied it. I did do one too many zeros. Let me erase that. Between it's going to be 100, so it's going to go between the two middle zeros, because this is 100 times greater than 96,000. So I just looked at how many times I multiplied. Or if I really look at it this way, how many times did I move the decimal over to get to 96? I moved the decimal over 1, 2, that's 100. So my quotient is going to be 100. You are going to do 7 through 12 odd. You're going to do all of 13 through 16. And then on the back side, you're going to do 17, 19, 22, and 23.